So we have a lot to cover this study session, so I think we'll start right on time. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Councilman Shiska is just running late, Sarah.
Okay.
Would you like to do roll call?
Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Orr,
Here.
Councilman Blair,
Yes.
Councilman Good,
Here.
Councilman Lamerson,
Here.
Councilwoman Scholl. Here. And Councilman Shishka will be a little late, and the record will reflect that Mayor Mangarelli is excused from the meeting.
Very good, thank you. So we have been looking forward to this day to discuss traffic. And so, Ian, are you going to lead us off?
Yeah, I am.
All right.
I think
Would
I'm
you
going
like
to run
to
us through
just
it.
a little bit of what the order is going to be, what the expectations are?
Sure. So I have presented, I've obviously created a PowerPoint presentation
Okay.
to go through, but primarily just as a guide for me to get some important information I feel you should know on certain subjects. And then, within it, it will touch on a lot of the things that generally cover areas of concern that we've heard from staff, kind of collected that information. So if at any time you feel like we're in an area where anybody wants to bring up questions or go more specific on specific improvements or just the topic matter in general, that's the way I'd like to handle it. We just go ahead and you just ask questions regarding that. So we can get into it in just a minute, but I have an outline, and then ultimately it's mainly just a time for us to kind of address some of the things that we've heard about, share some of the things that we have been doing, some of the stuff that's maybe upcoming, and then address
And
any
Ian,
questions that you have for me.
So I'll just ask, so the items that council submitted, many of those we received from constituents. You will address those within this presentation?
Yeah, so some of them aren't specifically addressed, but there are slides towards the end that do that. And then I do have basically my own informational sheet that kind of includes all of those.
Perfect.
So if anybody has a question or comes up with something that maybe, hey, I said this, I'll probably have that with me so I can bring that up specifically.
Maybe to add as well, Mayor Pro Tem, there's several of those items will take significant research, whether through staff and or the Pedestrian, Bike, and Traffic Advisory Committee. So through PBTAC and or staff, then they'll be reviewed and additional information will come forward later then as well.
Very good.
Yeah, I guess I would add that some of them are acknowledgments that we've received those. They wouldn't necessarily be the solution presented here today. But obviously we're here to talk about traffic operations, and those things in general. But I do have basically an outline to the presentation, and I've developed this to cover those things that I think are pretty important as background. I've laid out several of those, including just kind of, maybe we know this, but some of the factors affecting traffic growth in the area in general, and then how it relates to traffic and some of the things that we're seeing out on the roadway in general. I do touch on background policies and regulations, a little bit about PBTAC, what they've done and they've accomplished, and then we're going to get into specifically traffic signals, speed limits, some of the downtown traffic and parking things that we've heard and talked about, and then striping and some other concerns just that didn't fall in really a category. And so, obviously, one of the main reasons we're here is that we all recognize that traffic is and has been increasing, and that's good, and it's going to continue. We're experiencing this due to increased population growth, not only in Prescott, but the region in general. And, we as one of the larger cities, we draw a lot of the regional traffic in on our roadways. We also have a strong tourism draw. We have many special events throughout the year that load and tax our system. And while these are good things, a lot of what challenges us is that we're an older city and we're built out pretty much in the south end, what we'll call, traditional Prescott. And so a lot of our improvements have already been completed where we don't have a lot of room for future expansion of our roads, like from 4 to 6 lanes. And so we can't easily accommodate growth by just adding roadways. It's just a little graph I put together and a table. Basically what the table shows is 2010, these are counts on some of our arterial roadways as a reference. 2010 and 2016, COP indicates that those are on-ground counts done through account contracts, so those are real counts done. So for instance, you can see that for the most part, all of those have increased substantially over that 6-year period. And the very bottom of the table shows you the per year growth rate between those count periods. So on average of just this little sample of 7 roadways, we're experiencing 1.84% growth per year over this 6 years. Then when we look at the 2025 numbers and the 2040 numbers, those are projections taken from the last time we did the update on the RTP, the CYMPO Regional Transportation Plan. So it looks at our traffic and then it models it out based on land use and things like that. But as you can see, in the 2025 projections that were done about 3 years ago, I think that was done in 15, we're already in some instances higher or right at the levels that they're projecting in 2025 when we did this 3 years ago. So, you know, you can see that on Whipple. We're already exceeding those projections for 2025. And that's why those growth rates are a little under. We're redoing that RTP right now. It's our 5-year window. So we're going to do the 40-45 plan. And some of those will get updated and bring those numbers out. But the whole point of this slide is to show you that our volumes are increasing. And even with what they're projecting, we're probably going to be slightly higher. Now, obviously, if the economy changes or things like that change, you know, you vary. But and then up at the top, we show that we had 123,000 people in the region, basically the SIMPO region. That would be Chino, PV, Prescott, and some county areas within the boundary. 123,000 in 2010, and they project 210,000 in 2040. That could go up or down based on what we find out with the new plan. But we're growing.
Who is they?
Who is they?
Yeah,
The people
you keep
that are-
saying they project.
Yeah, we SIMPO hires a consultant. So in this instance, it's AECOM. They're a transportation and transportation planning consultant that works out of the valley, and then they use the ADOT traffic planning model in
All
their.
right,
in their
thank you
studies.
for answering that. It comes out of ADOT, and thank you very much.
Yeah.
You know, Ian, before we go on, I think this is, Michael, your statistic that you have that we've been talking about. I think it's important to, when we talk about growth, since 1990,
Yeah,
Prescott has grown 55%.
that's correct in population, and Prescott Valley's grown 500%.
I think that's just important
And
for
Chino's
folks to know.
grown
And
300%.
Chino Valley's grown 300%. So a lot of this traffic that we're seeing is not necessarily just Prescott's growth. It's everybody's.
Yeah, and you see in the growth rates, the projections go down, but those projections are probably off. So when we redo those, they'll probably be up in the 1.5, 1.84 again.
Yeah, I agree, Ian. I looked at a number of the SIMPO reports a couple of years ago, and most of them were retrospective analysis of growth that included some of the very low growth years, and they were using those averages to project forward. So I felt that some of their projections were really inadequate to look at the real growth we're seeing and use more current growth patterns to project some of our demands. And I think those kinds of numbers that we're looking at here kind of verify that.
Yeah, and I mean, based on 1.84%, you're talking about a doubling in. This isn't population, this is traffic, but you could double that traffic in 38 years. That sounds like a long time, but when you're talking about 95 to 2008, you're probably 70% of those numbers. But if you start doubling, traffic on Willow Creek Road, you're going to be up in the 40s, 50,000 traffic, numbers by 2040. So it's just a good thing to keep us wide awake and aware. So one of the things I just wanted to cover and just briefly touch on is some of the guidance documents, things that we've talked about in the past that basically regulate or otherwise guide us in what we do on our streets. So regarding speed limits, traffic, calming, what signalization, where we do these things. So those primarily are the manual on uniform traffic control devices, which we've talked about a lot in here. And they primarily cover striping and signing guidance, and then when to put in traffic signal warrants, stop signs, roundabouts. We have the Arizona Revised Statute, Chapter 28. That would be the vehicle code, but that also gets into statutory speed limits, some of those things that limit us to what we do in business and residential zones. We have the council-adopted traffic calming policy, and that basically sets for staff where and what devices we can put on streets to assist with cut-through traffic and speeding and other complaints, driven from the public. And then along with that, closely related, it would be the Prescott Street Classification Map. It was adopted by council as part of the last policy adoption in 2010. And it basically sets the classification of each of the roadways in town. And then through that sets the geometrics, kind of what we're talking about with design speed when we design on it. And so that classification map does really control what we can do on certain streets and what we do. And that can be modified though from time to time, and we'll probably be bringing that back to you in the next 6 months or so. We have the general engineering standards. They are closely linked to street classification, and that would be when we're developing what we do with widths but again, speed limits, curves, and horizontal design elements, limit us on our speeds and things. Talk about that with like Williamson Valley Road and speed limits a little later. And then finally, we have the PBTAC, which is Pedestrian Bicycle Traffic Advisory Committee. And that's a standing committee of council that's been doing a lot of work on your behalf in regards to traffic and pedestrian and bicycle facilities.
And that's been for about 3.5 years, right?
Yeah, in various forms.
I mean, with Mayor Oberg.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, that's one of the things we're just going to talk about here. What is their role, and how can they be used? But generally, they're used to review city projects and developments when they're in the design stage for bike, ped, and traffic input. That's basically what they're doing. So staff goes in there, we show them what's coming up. They input. Doesn't always mean we take everything they say, but we certainly take that input and try to make those changes, make improvements. They consider and provide recommendations on traffic items. These could come from the citizens. This could come from you. This could come from staff. They monitor the city's traffic collision in conjunction with us. We provide them reports every month about things like severe injury, fatals, any trends we see, and bike and pedestrian crashes. And then they look at that to see if we have problems, if we need to mitigate, if we need to educate, what we need to do. They also bring their own safety concerns that they've heard. A lot of them serve as members of local bike organizations, other organizations that are related to transit and those kinds of things. So they're out there every month looking around, and so they'll bring up concerns, kind of like what we've heard. Some of the things I have are things that you guys have heard. They do that as well. And then finally, they meet with the public to assist with difficult traffic issues. They kind of serve that role where the resident needs to talk to someone beyond staff. So in between staff and you guys, they deal with that too.
And unfortunately, Bill Finelli is not with us today. He's traveling. I know there are some members in the audience that are on the committee that they've really done tremendous work, and I just want to thank them for all that they've done.
And so we did want to just kind of recognize some of the things they've done in just the short time they've been active. And traffic improvement wise, they were instrumental in supporting and refining the Williamson Valley Road and Iron Springs Road restriping that kind of came from council and the citizens. They supported and have helped us with the design on the four-way stop at Mount Vernon and Carlton, just kind of the striping and some of those things. They're working on some Share the Road artwork for solid waste vehicles that'll be coming in the future. They have helped us improve bike detection and get symbols out there so that the bikes are better served by our traffic signals. We have a project coming up on 89 at Willow Lake Road there by Watson Lake at the roundabout. We see a need to improve pedestrian crossings at all roundabouts, but that one specifically because we have so many events there. And then we have campers, and there's a service station and a Quickie Mart over there. So we're going to do some installations of a rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Push the button. It's an enhanced crossing for pedestrians at roundabouts. We think it's the way to go for the future because we're adding more and more roundabouts. So that'll be the first one. We'll see how that works, and then we'll probably expand that. They've also been instrumental in review of our pavement maintenance and rehabilitation projects to, whenever we can, we either optimize our bike lane widths or add new sections of bike lane widths. And we've done that on Commerce, Willow Creek Road in the north, Walker Road with that project. We've added some on Smoke Tree Lane, and then we have a proposal to do that on West Gurley Street and the Thumb Butte area. And that would be additions to our bike network while not taking away from any of the vehicular traffic movements and things like that. And finally, they have one ongoing with a recent handrail installation and a signing prohibiting crossings at Sheldon, where it Cortez tees in up at Sheldon, or Cortez, up at the end of Cortez and Sheldon there. We're getting a lot of people crossing, and we've had some crashes there. So we're trying to mitigate that by promoting people to go to the signals near the future Hilton. They've done other things heavily in bike racks. They've also trying to work with BASIS and meet with schools to improve some things like that. But they're doing a lot, and they continue to work. So that's a very useful tool that council and staff has.
They also applied for and received the bicycle-friendly status for the city, bronze, which is good.
So now we get into the nitty-gritty, where we talk about things that, are operating but maybe not efficiently or efficiently enough, need some improvements, and what do we have planned. But basically, first off, when we go into our traffic signals, I just wanted to kind of give a brief background on what we have and what we're doing, kind of how we're operating, so you can understand where we're coming from in implementing improvements that you want. And basically, the city has 51 traffic signals that we currently own. We have 3 that are owned by the county that we maintain for them. And that means we also kind of monitor the timing of those. Those notably are on 89 at Yavpe, and then Willow Creek Road and Pioneer, and Willow Creek Road and Williamson Valley Road. So most of our signals of the 51 are not interconnected with each other. Most are they operate standalone. They, in general, we favor mainline operations. So when they're built, we always are providing more timing on the main line so that we move the optimum amount of traffic, and then obviously the side street is served, but not equally. We use in-ground detection. We use loops in the ground, which limits us, and we don't have loops at every signal approach. We have loops at every signal, but we don't have them, for instance, let's say we're at Willow Creek and Green and Pulliam. We typically only have loops on the side streets, and then maybe in a left turn pocket if we have left turn protected left turns. But we don't have them on the main line, so we don't call the signal fully actuated. So it's just kind of sitting on the main line in green, and then when side street traffic comes up, you would be served because it can see them. But in order to move forward and maybe get a little more advanced in the future, we probably should go to fully actuated signals where we include more loops in the future and maybe some different systems that aren't as prone to failure. It's one of the reasons Willow Lake and Willow Creek Road, Willow Lake Road and Willow Creek has some issues with its left turns. We have that at some locations. Those loops are prone to failing when the asphalts move, or there's, it's a cable, so it fails because it's in the roadway. We do have 2 existing interconnect systems working in various states. We have the downtown system, which was put in probably 7-8 years ago. That basically ties the signals on Gurley Street together from Marina to McCormick. So it's like a 5-signal mini interconnect system that ties through there. And then it reaches down Montezuma to hit the Montezuma and Goodwin signal. Yes.
I'm sorry. Councilman Good, did you want to?
Oh, I already made my comment.
Okay, good. All right. Just want to make sure I'm sorry. And Alexa? Not you. Oh, it's you.
Oh, it's you.
It's you. Hello, Mr. Shiska. Okay, Councilman Shiska, go ahead.
What, do we have increased capabilities with these lights, like to to have a flashing yellow before it actually turns yellow and then turns red?
Yeah, so I do talk about that, but we can talk about that now. Yeah, our cabinets are advanced enough. We're running pretty modern controllers in the cabinets. Most of them are running either Type 2s or Cobalts. They have the ability to run lagging lefts, leading lefts, the kind of things you're talking about. And I think we do have to do some slight modifications to our cabinets to get flashing yellow lefts in, but it's not a huge change. And I talk about that a little later. We can talk about this at now. Certainly, I think there is benefits to come from changing some of the things we're doing in regards to left turning. I feel like we're a community where clear indication of what you're supposed to do, like yield, like you can turn left on a yield condition, would be good for our traffic, especially since we can't expand most of our intersections and our roadways are not going to expand. So we've got to do things to improve what we have. So we have to make them as efficient as possible. Things like flashing yellow lefts, if they get more people to go on the green ball and yield, I think that's a good thing. It's a change. It's new. And so we really have to go, are we going to commit to that and do that? I've been reluctant to try some new and things like that because I didn't know if the community was ready or the council was ready, but I think they're good things.
I'm really talking about also just flashing yellow on straight through the intersections, because I've seen so many people run red lights. And it's because they want to beat that yellow, and they don't end up beating the yellow. They don't even end up hitting the red before they cross the intersection. And it's really going to be serious one of these days. And I'm thinking, what if we had flashing yellows before it turned yellow, so that people were really warned about the fact that, yeah, it's going to be turning yellow and you need to slow down.
So you're talking about flashing yellow on a through movement.
I'm talking about flashing yellow on through movement.
I'm curious, have you seen that in use somewhere?
In Mexico.
In Mexico.
In Mexico.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And it really works well. Last thing you want to do is get caught by a federale in Mexico for doing something wrong. And so it's really easy to start to slow down when you see that flashing yellow. I just know that it's worked with us, and was wondering if we could, it might abate some of the rushing to get through the light.
Sure. So the first thing I would say is that I don't know offhand if that's an approved, control use of a signal. The MUTCD is very clear about what you do at signals and what you don't do. And if you're outside of those parameters, except for approved experimental uses, you open yourself up to a lot of liability. I'm just saying that because I don't know if this is approved. I will follow up and see what the MUTCD has said about that. They've obviously done innovative things like flashing yellow, lagging lefts, hawks, and those dark signals that light up when you cross pedestrians. At some point, those were all new things. And so they got experimental approval, and eventually they come into the MUTCD. It could have it in there, but I'll follow up because I don't know. But certainly I think we should be looking at some of these more innovative things if they help us, and they don't decrease safety.
Councilman Blair?
I've got about 13 different things. So don't know when to bring them up, but the aggravation is beyond aggravating to me when you're going east at Lowe's and you're in the left-hand turn lane and you wait, which seems to be a half hour, with a red arrow when there's no traffic coming down the hill. When you start talking about a flashing yellow light, I've run that. Sorry, Chief. I've run that light. I can't tell you how many times, because I refuse to sit there like an idiot when there's no traffic coming, because I'm adult enough to know when to make a left-hand turn. And I think that's something that we need to look at. Downtown, just now coming to the meeting here, at the corner of Cortez, going Gurley eastbound, the light at Cortez and Gurley, the hand that's there for pedestrian walk turns red. 2 seconds later, the light's red. There's not enough lag time to finish your movement in through the intersection with people in the crosswalk. There's no separation between the hand turning red opposed to the light turning red.
Oh, gotcha.
Also coming here today on Montezuma Street, because we don't have such a thing as all walk, where the pedestrian walks on a light, and then traffic goes east one way, and then the traffic goes west one way. The traffic on Montezuma Street was backed up from Gurley Light, clear through Goodwin. And there's people in Goodwin, and the light changes. So now you got the whole intersection tied up because we can't make a right-hand turn because of the islands we put in for beautification. We have one lane on the right, and if we had an all-walk where we had the pedestrians safely out of the way, then we could move traffic down there. We have got to start thinking about doing different things because it's not doing anything but getting worse. Rosser and Willow Creek Road. You can sit at Rosser all night long trying to make a left-hand turn off of Rosser onto Willow Creek Road in the middle of the night. That's another one I've run 100,000 times.
Yeah, so
And I think some of those lights should flash red at night
yeah,
to where you don't have to stop. You know, you stop, you look both ways and say, okay, I'm a big boy, nobody's coming, I can go.
could I address that one?
Sure.
Just because that's on signals right now. So one of the next slide talks about efficiency measures and use, and then some things that we need to do better is we can improve efficiencies at signals like Willow Creek Road and Rosser by even if we don't implement this large system, or we don't have to wait for those things to come into play, because any of these signals are able to run some time of day programs. It takes time to develop them, but basically what it does is, you know, during the peak hours, we have to favor these mainline movements, and so you'd have to wait longer. But once we hit 6 o'clock, I mean, it dies off pretty early here. Once we hit certain times a day, we need to be better about implementing some changes in the timing plans. So the time clock comes, sets up a new timing pattern, and it balances it better. So it gives less time on the main line, serves you quicker, you get out. That's what we're really talking about for that fix.
Well, and that's good, because just to say, and I have to say it, the fact of the matter is you have some of these intersections that are so gummed up. Willow Creek Road, Commerce Drive. When we put in that light there at Honda, when I was sitting in this very seat, we made the comment, we will approve as a city council to put in that light only if they're synchronized. They're not synchronized.
Yeah.
It's a disaster. When you sit in one intersection, the next intersection's backed up into the intersection you're trying to get through, something's wrong.
Yeah, sir.
And so, I mean, I just sharing that with you. And the other thing I'll share with you is as things grow and expand, that intersection at Lee Boulevard, which I asked to have done or looked at in March, here it is, June, no pavement markings whatsoever. All that new traffic going to Touch Market, the Ranch, and the Fen, there's no pavement markings today still. No stop bars where the fire station is, none where Forest Villas is, no realignment, no parking stalls where the tire shop is. Somebody's got to start getting this stuff done. My last complaint is during the pavement striping this last month, we got to have the roads swept before they put the pavement markers down. Go through intersection, 4 points, the biggest intersection in Prescott. All the debris from the winter is still in the middle of the road, still where the yellow lines are. They lay those lines down over top of the dirt, and guess what? Now the next time when those street sweepers come through, we have no lines. So I think we can do some better things, and I think rather than me sitting out here, I think staff should be paying attention to all these things all the time, and not just once every time we start getting here to complain. So.
And I would add on the Lee Boulevard, because this came before the bicycle pedestrian group, we asked for designated for safety, because that's an ADOT intersection. And we've actually asked we wrote a letter to ADOT about a left turn.
Yeah,
right?
that's a separate issue, but yes, that intersection
But then
comes
on
up
the
for various
striping that
reasons.
Councilman Blair's talking about, we're also talking about staying in designated lanes for people when they do turn, so they don't swing wide.
Well, and again,
That's another piece
when
of
you
that.
turn left there on Lee Boulevard to go up to the Fen or any of those, there's 3 separate things that happen
Exactly
right
right.
there. Going to the hotel, going up to
Yavapai Hills.
Yavapai Hills, and going up to the Fen. And there's no pavement markers to let these older people know that have moved in here that aren't used to things. And plus, now you have Discount Tire, whatever the name of the tire company is. There's like 12 cars parked on the side of the road, but there's no parking signs. I challenged the fire truck and 2 cars to try to even get up that hill.
Sure.
So when you start talking about a public safety issue, it bothers me.
Yeah. So this is jumping ahead, but under striping, one of the things we had was we included that because we've obviously developed a plan. Lee Boulevard has been striped. The first round of striping was correcting it from where Yavapai Hills comes down. You can barely see it on the bottom drawing there. There's like 3 yellow lines there by the fire department. But that was the first thing that we did was we channelized and better defined what's going on as you come off of 69. So that when you first come by, I think it's Lee Circle, and then over to Yavapai Hills Drive. And then we brought the striping just past the intersection. And then this, later, we also did talk to the ranch management and ownership, and we marked off no parking on the inside of the curve there where it says Lee Boulevard real small. We did control parking. That was way back. And then we did hear additional concerns from both, Councilman Blair, others, about what was going on the outside of the curve. And we didn't want to remove that parking for various reasons because we're sensitive to the fact that that business needs to operate, and they have parking too. But
Those lights aren't there right now.
no, that's the plan that our striper has so that he'll put it in. And I do, I understand the frustration of not having it done instantly, but that plan has been given to our striper and it will be done. And we've communicated with, Mr. Lee in that.
All due respect, I don't call 4 months instantly.
Yeah. So, but I just want to let you know, we're not specifically ignoring it, and we are trying to make the changes. We've also heard in that location, a desire to add a 3-way stop or do some other things. We're sensitive to that too, and we'll be watching that because a lot of the neighborhood, they never had to deal with anything coming from Touchmark. And so while we're not changing it yet, because again, it should meet warrants. If you have site visibility, you should be able to keep it open. But we'll be watching that for future control at Yavapai Hills and Touchmark.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Is that a state-operated light?
The signal is, what I'm talking about is actually making this the city-owned street of Yavapai Hills Drive.
No, I appreciate that,
Touchmark.
but
the
also,
signal is state-operated.
but you work hand in hand with the state.
We request things from them. Like we had a pedestrian collision at the intersection, and we wanted to hash the left turn pockets so that would better channelize them. But all we can do is request that they consider that.
Well, if they can't see it's a public safety issue coming down from Touchmark at the ranch to the light, there should be a designated right-hand turn arrow when people are making a left-hand turn onto Walker. Do you understand what I mean? There's no arrow there.
Yeah, coming out of here, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
and they
So
control
you
that.
you have a gummed up intersection once again because you have people that are coming from the Finn or from the place up there, Touchmark the ranch, and they sit in that right-hand turn lane while 6 cars turn left to go onto Walker, or on the road
Yeah.
there on Lee Boulevard, excuse me, and they just sit there forever. So therefore, you got a gummed up mess. So there's got to be some coordination with somebody.
That's one of the things. I'm just going to go back a couple slides because one of the things we try to do, we do things. We don't always do things good, but there are some things that we do right. And one of the things we do is efficiency measures. We as a city have implemented pretty much everywhere we can right turn overlaps. I think you're used to that. Where if you have a left turn movement, why make them sit and keep them moving? So we like to use that, and we want to expand that everywhere we can.
And thank you.
ADOT doesn't do that. I'd like to also, and they have they're a huge organization that has different needs and desires. Their goal is to move mainline traffic. That's their primary goal. Their primary goal isn't to make it easy for us to turn left. So I'm not saying they're trying to hurt that, but that's not their primary goal. 69 and Lowe's, ADOT signal. If that was a city signal, and we should never take that road, just for that. But if that was a city signal, that's a single left turn lane with great sight visibility. You can see forever up the hill. It would be permissive, protected, permissive. I would allow you to turn with your judgment when it's free. ADOT won't do that on their major roadways. That's a 3-lane, 6-lane arterial. And so even after, when they do their improvement, I wouldn't anticipate that they're going to let you turn. And then their coordination pattern is going to hold you because it's moving mainline traffic, and that left holds up mainline traffic.
Sorry, Chief, when I turn left.
So,
Excuse me, Ian.
Yeah.
Councilman Shiska has a comment.
You know, I guess my question is an overarching question, Ian. Is there a way that we can meld common sense with warrants? You know, I think that it's great, you know, when we dealt with Robinson Drive, and we didn't want a left-hand turn out of there because it's a suicide turn. I'm not sure the warrants said, yeah, no, you can't do that. We haven't got enough accidents there yet, or something like that. But somehow we have to combine the common sense that all of this body is supposed to have with what you do.
yeah, and I mean, I think you see that at Carlton and Mount Vernon. You know, we can go around and round and try to just pull back fences and make it so that it meets all the standards. And at the end of the day, you could probably go, you know, does it meet, because there's like 4 different warrants, does it meet all those warrants? But there's engineering judgment in there as well. And some of the engineering judgment is just common sense stuff.
Well, I think the best thing you ever did is to make that a permanent situation.
Yeah. But we, you know, that happened at Goodwin in Mount Vernon. That happened at Pleasant and Goodwin. We have examples of where that's happening. I think one of the ones you mentioned, it's not in the slide,
Right.
Solstice
Solstice
and Trail Walk. Certainly I agree
Absolutely.
that one, there's very low traffic there, but that one makes perfect sense to do that for various reasons. And that's kind of an example of that. But you know, you do have to be careful about where you go with these things, because we don't want it just to be, not from your standpoint, but sometimes other things play into why we would create 4 ways and 3 ways and
Can I
things.
give you another one?
Sure.
If you're coming down Sheldon Street and you're turning left and going south on Montezuma, if you watch the traffic flows, they're all turning right at Willis and then turning left on Granite because they don't want to go through the mess of Montezuma and Gurley
I
to
agree.
make that turn.
I agree.
So now you have traffic that's backed up all the way back. Maybe what we can do is turn 2 of those parking lanes at the end, turn them parallel, so we can stripe 2 lanes and get a designated left-hand turn lane on Granite and a straight through on West Sheldon.
Willis and Granite improvements. That's what you're
Correct.
talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
That-
I would agree that you can tell through what you're talking about that intersection, and it's only going to get more used as Hilton comes and maybe Granite starts to redevelop, I mean, I could see that thing going towards a 4-way stop. Now, I'm not saying we need to do that now, but I would agree that there are some things where you could balance some parking removals. But again, you know, from our standpoint, we're very sensitive to removing of parking because it's a sensitive issue as well. So, but I agree that needs some attention and it could be better. A lot of people do that. That's why you can't turn left at McCormick.
And the best part is when they're going the opposite way in the afternoon and they're swinging off Gurley Street, coming down Granite and turning right on Willis,
Hard to
they got
see.
a left-hand turn, protected left-hand turn. But again, once that left-hand turn is done, it goes to red. And you can't turn. So if on Willis, if they're coming this way,
Willis at Montezuma.
yeah. So if that was a blinking yellow arrow, you could move more traffic through.
Yeah. For some reason, I can't recall the operation of that one. I thought that would be protected then permissive.
No, it's solid red
Okay.
once it turns.
Look at that one. One of the things we do, I don't remember if it's here or in here, but we obviously, it's there, right under right turn overlaps. I'm a big fan of permissive and protected permissive lefts. I think whenever it's possible, we should be promoting people to turn left under the yield condition because it's more efficient for our signals. You know, you only have so much time there. So I try to stay away from pure protected unless I have dual lefts. There are communities where they let dual lefts on major roadways turn left on a yield. Tucson. You go to Tucson, you'll see 6-lane arterials where 2 lanes are turning in a yield condition. They're a whole nother level of brave over there. But I certainly, I'll check that.
Thank
You know, Councilman, because there's good sight visibility. We could certainly be turning left on
When
that.
you're looking up Willis Street and there's very little traffic coming across, and then all of a sudden that light turns from green to red and you're sitting there and looking at 6 cars behind you and going, Well, we should be able just to turn left. Again, I'm sorry I ran the lights.
So
That's 6 different lights.
I don't know if you want me to get back into it, because I do come back to a lot of the things.
Yeah,
We
I
talked
would-
about
let's go
scramble
ahead.
system. I'm going to touch on that, and
Let's
we
go
can
ahead.
talk about that.
Unless any other councilman would like to speak.
I'd just like to say
Okay, go ahead.
You know, Ian, one of the nice things about campaign season is that an inordinate amount of people come up to you and want to express their concerns for the community. Always, every time someone comes up, one of the subjects is traffic. Now, we can't tell Chino Valley and Prescott Valley to stop growing. What we can do is do what we have control over, which is improve the flow of things in this city. So I think that with the growth, which is going to come whether we want it to or not, with the growth, we need to be smarter about how we move people. And maybe not pay as much attention to the official, you can only do this when you have these things in line. We need to be forward thinking and think about how are we going to get people from one place to another, because we're not going to build more roads.
Yeah, I think, you know, I agree with that, and that's why we're here today. You know, I'm honest. I know that there are things out there that we can make improvements to. A lot of them, it's easy to say it right here. It's hard to implement when you have 55 signals and all these other things to do. But we're making strides to do that, and then we have some big things coming that should help a lot, like the Willow Creek Road. The fact that you guys, as a council, have acknowledged that that's something you want to pursue, put it in the streets IIP, talking about the Willow Creek Corridor ITS system. I did want to talk about that because yesterday, Craig and I went to ADOT. We went to their Northwest, the construction management group out there, and they gave us a presentation on what they've done with their system from Heather Heights, there on 69, all the way to Navajo. And so we learned a little bit about what they exactly did and what it did for them. And honestly, it's really positive because they had a system that was pretty much similar to ours. And they didn't do, you know, it took steps and it took time, but they didn't have to do crazy things that are unreachable to make something like that work here. And so that's really what we're looking at in the coming, you know, few years to try to really make some big impacts on Willow Creek Road, is to tie all those signals together, truly together, likely using radio, radio communications, and then running these time of day plans. They had, I think they reported something like a 40% reduction in travel time, and they had a program that actually picks up the Wi-Fi pings on your cell phones coming through the corridor. They added that as part of this. And so they had real-time data that they could share with us. It wasn't just anecdotal. And they had maximum travel times through that corridor of 17 minutes in some cases. And you could see spikes, but it was primarily now based on construction, accidents, things like that. So they've really done some improvements out there to get it to go. It's going to come with some cost. It will come with cost here too. And what I mean by that is we have to make a decision that moving traffic overall on the main line is our priority because they're competing needs. Sometimes if you say, I want you to serve them very quickly during certain times, you can't always get that on the side street when your primary goal is to move the traffic on the main line. So, they've seen some of that, but very positive. We've got a lot of contacts from them to talk to some of these vendors and things to explore those opportunities. But I think we could see a system that has huge improvements in overall average speeds, reduction in queuing, and delays in general. They had an 8.7 mile stretch, and they were doing it in 17 minutes. I think the average speeds were somewhere in the 36, 37 miles an hour. We have a
Excuse me, Ian,
6-mile section.
Councilwoman Show has a comment.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I think we could all sit here all day and identify issues and intersections that we personally experience issues at. But I'm wondering, is there a way that we can systematically monitor and identify problem intersections? Because I think I mentioned this when we were talking about 3-hour parking. I think we need to have baseline information, and then when we make changes, have data that shows improvements, or maybe it doesn't work. And so I'm wondering if there is a system out there, or if we can develop something that will give us data and information that we can use to make decisions.
So I guess,
I have a comment on that. Probably over a year ago, I asked Michael, I'd like to see the last traffic study that the city did. And the answer was, we never did one. So Michael and I reached out to some of the well-known traffic engineering study groups to come up with what would it cost us to put together a comprehensive traffic study and a plan. And the answers were, Michael?
$250,000.
And then when we decided, well, I don't think that's going to fly, let's see if we can trim this down into just the essential areas.
About $180.
$180. So that's just to study it, much less not looking at the cost to actually implement it. So I agree with you, Councilwoman Scholl, that we have to have more of a comprehensive plan than putting Band-Aids on these individual intersections, or a left turn lane here or left turn lane there. Our growth and the amount of traffic we're dealing with is growing so rapidly that we need to implement something now rather than deal with serious congestion problems, where if we have to shut down an intersection or a road to fix it, the overlapping problems become just unbearable. I mean, we've already heard that the maximum capacity of Highway 89 through the Dells is about 18,000 vehicles per day, and we're above 15,000 as it is. So we're going to hit capacity pretty quickly. And then we have to shut down 89 to fix it and widen it. And then everybody's going to be on Willow Creek, Willow Lake, and there are already huge problems. So I think we just need to recognize how significant this problem is and get a plan and get it implemented. In the meantime, I think we need to identify these critical intersection problems and get them fixed. Not sit there and talk about it and say, we're going to get around to it, whatever that might be. We've got some serious problems right now that could be fixed with pretty simple solutions.
And I will add to that, Ian, I don't understand why they're striping. We talked about striping on Lee Boulevard at our committee meeting 3-4 months ago. I know that we contract that, right?
yes, it's all
Why does that
contract.
take so long? Like, I know weather had a little bit to do with it, but
Yeah, I mean, realistically, TSI, our contractor, he's basically the show up here. He's basically, the person that does all striping for pretty much every project and everything that's going on. He also has most of northern Arizona. So we don't have in our contract, our contract's not written in a way that we have time frames that are necessarily have to be adhered to. So maybe that's what we look at,
maybe that
because
should
we don't really
change.
have a lot of control on that. He does what he can for us, but honestly, we don't. I haven't threatened to remove the contract. We had poor performance in the past, in the sense of this kind of thing, just not getting around to some of the things we wanted, and so we really expanded our search, and we got another contractor out of Phoenix. We thought, oh yeah, this is going to do the thing. Pretty much worse. It was bad. And I'm not making excuses for it, but I would say that the only way we're going to handle this is if we put in some kind of time frame on responses and some kind of penalties or something, so that when we identify modifications, there's a clear expectation of exactly when it will happen and what will happen if it doesn't come around. Because basically, the way it is there's a striping season. You don't stripe in the winter. You don't stripe when it's cold. You don't stripe when it's raining. So you're basically relegated to good springtime weather and then this summer right before the end of the fiscal year. Because that ends June 30th is our end. And so there's all this work in there that you have to do.
Well, next week is July,
Yes,
and I swear we've been waiting for that striping to be done for
yes,
4 months.
yes.
So that's
So-
an issue.
That's on me to somehow, make it so that we do it better, or we split up the project so that we just put out maybe we only put out main line and you do it within this time frame, and then we hire another contractor to respond to work that we need done on an on-call basis, or we can look at that
Can we
too.
not do that in-house?
The equipment is to set that up. The trucks and the equipment needed to do long line striping and some of these things. They don't right now. We don't have the capability to do even that section right now. We've looked at getting some equipment that would get us maybe where we could do something similar to that. We did look at that, especially this year when we went to some conferences and stuff. But we're not going to do long line certainly unless we want to spend $400,000 and get these big trucks. But that's an option too, where we could just bring it into our sign shop and do some stuff where we can get this spot stuff done, and then maybe they come back.
Can I ask a question? Can we look at, just a suggestion, contracting with the state of Arizona? They have their painting trucks. They're a taxing entity, and for the citizens as well as we are. Have we ever asked the question, when they're not busy, will they handle part of our contract?
Yeah, we can ask.
Or where we pay the state to do it?
Yeah, we can ask. Yeah, they have a striping crew that's out of the Northwest Prescott Valley District Maintenance Office. So we can ask that.
Okay, so why don't we move ahead? Thank you.
Moving forward. So some of the other things, we've talked about this already, and we don't have to spend time on this because, like you said, if we identify some problems, we need to go out there and make some changes and do some things. But we are looking at implementing a large-scale, system on Willow Creek Road to address this in a more global thing. But these other smaller issues. Going forward, though, we'll be looking at some changes to what we can do with flashing yellows, if trailing lefts and leading and lagging and all those things have some improvements. I'll mention one thing about just tracking where improvements are. We have the capability, if we were looking at individual signals, to certainly plug in the existing volumes, run the timing plans that we're running today, generate new timing plans or show new phases or new left turns or new things, and then see what kind of differences that makes in the overall operation of the intersection using analysis software, Synchro. We use Synchro. So it has the capability to even do some video, rudimentary 2D video stuff where you can see the queuing go down and some of that stuff. So we can do that sort of thing. It's harder when you get large networks. That's why they're wanting to have $180,000 or $250,000 because it gets a lot of time involved. But we have the ability to do that so that we could at least say, we went from this delay to this delay, and you're seeing that in the field, in your feel. So it would give a good comparison. Speed limits. So just real quick, how do we set speed limits? Why are they set? We have prima facie speed laws. Business and residential areas are 25 miles an hour. Arizona revised statute sets that. We passed that local ordinance for our alleyways, 15 mile an hour. We have that in place now. As Public Works does have its own policy on arterial speed zoning and how we handle that. That was developed back with the old Transportation Coordinating Committee. And so that involves actually taking speed counts, reviewing those on it's somewhere in the 5 to 10 year range. You should be looking at them, I think, ideally every 5 years. Make sure you're in line, make sure you don't have speed traps, things like that. But we do have a way that we kind of handle how we post on like Williamson Valley Road, Iron Springs, and all those things. Not to say that that's appropriate.
When was the last time you did it?
It's probably been 8 years, I'd say, based on
I think it's
workload
due.
and things. Yes, I would agree. Now, that doesn't mean that we haven't looked at that individually on other roads, but not the entire network together. And then just standard practice engineering judgment. And again, 85th percentile speed, we post so that it's enforceable by the police. If you have a high, let's say we just arbitrarily go out somewhere and post 25 miles an hour on a 4-lane arterial when everyone was driving 45 miles an hour, you're basically everyone's behavior is not going to instantly change because they react to the roadway conditions, the expectations, the geometry. So you're probably going to put about 90% of people into a condition where they're ticketable. And that's one of the things we did way back when Willow Creek used to be 35. We went and did a speed survey and saw that we could ticket it was like 52% of all drivers were ticketable, 11 or over. And so obviously we had underposted that based on the conditions. And so that's why it's 40 now. When we got Willow Lake Road, it was 35. We raised it to 40 based on the conditions. We've lowered speed limits, raised speed limits, but that's kind of how we're setting them.
When's the last time you looked at Rosser?
Rosser is a special condition in the sense that Rosser, if we went out and did a speed survey, Rosser should likely be 30 or 35 miles an hour. I could just tell you anecdotally that would be the case. Once you get past Campbell in the pinch point,
Yeah.
speeds are going to increase. They're probably going 34 miles an hour in there as an 85th percentile. That's why I have this considerations note. You also use other things than just the straight numbers. We do. Roadside zoning. What's the development? What's the level of access? How close is the spacing of the driveways? Do you have sidewalk? Do you not have sidewalk? What's the site visibility? Are there pads and bikes? Rosser, when I got here, it wasn't connected. People felt like it was this residential area, and even though they signed documents, probably in their purchase agreements that showed that it was going to go through as a planned connector, they still feel like it's a residential street that's just used as this crosstown connection. And so their sensitivity to raising that. You've seen that we've implemented radar signs, traffic calming, all kinds of things through the years to deal with the negative comments that we get about Rosser, trying to balance. It is used to move traffic. We only have that's another thing. This city only has so many east-west connections. We only have 89A, Willow Lake, Smoke Tree, Rosser, Sheldon Gurley.
Yep.
That's not much, really. And so people are going to use Smoke Tree. They're going to use Willow Lake. They're going to use Rosser, and traffic will continue to grow. So certainly we can do that, but there has to be so if staff went and did that, and it was 30 or 35, when we post that, what do we do with those complaints? So long as the policy is, or the direction of the council is that that's a 30-mile-an-hour street. Now, we're not going to mitigate and have 400 people going in to see PB-TAC, and what do we tell them? That's the reality of what you do with this. So it's operated as a 25-mile-an-hour street. We've tried to keep speeds near there, within 7 miles an hour. That's pretty much our traffic calming policy says if you're within 7 miles an hour of the posted speed, your street's doing pretty good. You can't ask for traffic calming if you don't go over 32. If you have a street. So the answer is we really haven't, because are we really going to change the speed limit? And I know that I had a comment in here about Rosser being a east-west connector. And so I know that's sensitive. What is Rosser? Is it we classify it as a major collector. We identify it as the function that it serves, which is to move traffic. And it moves 7,000, 6,000 cars a day, something like that.
I think I'm probably part of the problem, but when Eagle Ridge was designed, the people that were sitting up here are only as good as the people that look at the different things, planning and zoning wise. There should have never been allowing any kind of back out movement onto that road, knowing it was going to be a collector, but it passed through planning and zoning and through city council to allow that to happen. Well, it was soon figured out that there was a mistake made by doing that. Mm-hmm. So the next phase of that, it wasn't done. So, but that road was always intended back 45 years ago when it was Brown's Lane. It was always intended to be an east-west collector. So,
yeah, and you're right. The roadway changes, and it's not out of the question to move some sections up. Smoke Tree is a good example of that. Smoke Tree has 2 speed limits on it. So when you turn off of Smoke Tree and you're in that section where there's no direct residential access, from there all the way through the end of Prescott Lakes, basically to the church there by Lakewood, if you're familiar. It's 30, I think it's 30 or 35. We did a speed survey maybe within 5 years ago, and we raised that because it basically has sidewalk facilities, it has bike lanes, it has a split median. It was, why not let them go the speed they are meaning to go? We haven't had a lot of complaints regarding that. But once you come out of there and you hit the church, you know, then we have the more direct access as you come down towards Sequoia and some of those things, the fire station. We go back down, I think, to 25 or 30. We're a different speed limit, 30. Rosser, you could do that. It's a long enough section that you could raise it up in between like the adult center where we just have that median in there. You know, you can do that. You know, you don't want to break segments up too far where you're just changing every other second, but some of that's, you can do that sort of thing.
Well, coming off of Campbell, heading east, that big long sweeping hill going down through there, you know, the visibility is so good. That's one place it's really hard to go 25.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
I
in
mean,
the dip,
Impossible.
yeah, technically, if it was
In the dip
35
area?
yeah,
Yeah.
if it was 35 with that kind of visibility, would make sense.
And we, in that area, you know, within the last year, we've installed those permanently mounted radar signs kind of to finish the treatment of Rosser. We recognize that we can only do so much, but that makes the neighborhood, at least reminds the people using it that they should go slower. Through the years, we've put up truck restrictions, you know, no through vehicles, trying to stop them to use that as a connector. We've got residential neighborhood signs, a lot of things to try to balance the use of, it's a residential area where people live, but it's also it's just gonna keep having all this traffic. And so that you know, that's a tough one, but Smoke Tree actually has less.
Do those record the speeds?
They do, yeah. And even the portables that I think the PD, the citizens on patrol are running about 7 of those signs. They also can record
But you
speed.
always also have, when they go over a certain speed, it says slow down.
That's
Are you-
all programmable. We can change that. We can bring that up anytime we want and do certain things.
So the one that says "not you again," you program that for me?
Yeah. Yeah. So then the next one on speed limits is that, you know, through the information I received on just some concern areas, I didn't put Rosser here because it was its own separate slide later, but Rosser is on there as just a sensitive area where speed limit review and what we do with it is on there. But I've heard Copper Basin Road come up. Sheldon Street, I wasn't really quite clear on what's going on with the Sheldon Street one because honestly, Sheldon, I don't hear a lot about what's going on with Sheldon. Williamson Valley Road is challenging because of the curves. A large street with pretty tight geometry as you come down by Yakoshba.
Yeah, I was under the impression that the actual county line was a little farther north. But talking to Craig Brown, he was saying where that wall is near North 40. The beginning of that wall is actually where the county line is. That's what he
It's
said.
actually is it Shadow Valley?
It's 100 yards, maybe a couple 100 yards north of Shadow Valley Ranch Road.
So you come around through the
Well, I think the curves justify probably the 35 mile an hour. But after that curve is completed, there's not a whole lot of difference between that section of the road and
The
where
north
it goes
section?
up to 45.
Yeah.
And that's very common for people in that area to be doing 40, 45.
It's kind of
I don't know when the last time you
counterintuitive.
did a count, but it's pretty clear to me. I mean, I do it multiple times a day.
Sure, they're going 50s.
That would take some coordination with the county then as well, because coming southbound, they drop it from 45 to 35 just north of Willow Creek, the creek crossing itself. So then they would have to consider raising their section also.
Well, I kind of alluded to that. If we raised it and then they had a 45, 35, 45, then they might be more willing to increase that 35 section so we wouldn't have this start and stop kind of a situation.
Yeah, after you come around the curve through North 40, certainly we could raise the speed limit to be consistent with what they did. We have a curb section in there, so we this is just good information. Anywhere where we're going to have a vertical curbed roadway, 4 lanes, 6 lanes, shouldn't go over 45. And so because the vehicles can vault, when they come off the road, if they lose control and they come off the road, they'll actually go airborne. And so that's why we've reduced speed limits on Prescott Lakes coming down from Lamb and York. That used to be 50.
Yeah.
That was primarily because it was an urbanized section with vertical curb. Now, we know what people really drive. And so when we post 50, they're going 62, 60. But regardless, for legal purposes, we really want to protect ourselves and try to stick with a 45. That's what you're going to see when ADOT's done with their widening up by the airport. You know, our new section of 89, that's going to be 45. And actually, speaking of speed limits, when we come out of our chip seal, and we're finishing 89 through the Dells here, that was 50. It's already been changed to 45. So when they uncover that after construction, through the Dells will now be 45. We're also realigning some of the striping there at Granite Dells Ranch Road to push that striping out to improve site visibility for that county road. Now that that's our section of roadway, not ADOT, we own that. So we're reducing the speed limit to 45 to be consistent with what we do up by Fippen. And then our Fippen Trail all the way into the ADOT stuff that we will own. So we'll be 45 all the way through there. That means people will go, 53 instead of 59, realistically. Some other ones, Iron Springs Road. I've just heard Iron Springs Road. I didn't know if anyone had any questions on Iron Springs Road. I think we have a section south of Gail Gardner that's posted, 30. So there's a special condition in that section between Gail Gardner and 4 Points, which has that older rolled curb that's very difficult to, get into places, in and out. The old Burger King, the Arby's.
That's why they're all sitting there empty. If you'll change the curbs, they'll probably be full.
Yeah. It's also narrower section. So, and it has a lot of accesses. They're stacked up, kind of like Miller Valley. It's just an older area of town where we have a lot of accesses. So that's why we have a break in what's going on in Iron Springs. And honestly, you only have a small section of Iron Springs that's ours to Williamson Valley. So the 35, it was pretty much designed at a 40 in the geometrics, and so it's posted 5 lower at 35. That's normally what we
I think it's pretty clear that we're not going to be able to expand the roadways any more than we already have. So our challenge is to be able to move as much traffic in as safe a manner at a maximum safe speed. So the default should always be, is this safe to move a little faster? And not just say, well, some guideline tells us we shouldn't do that, because we're just going to see more and more congestion, and that creates a lot more danger because people are trying to jockey around a slow-moving car who's in the number 1 lane who says, I'm doing the speed limit and I'm not going a mile over, and everybody else is trying to get around them. Well, we're seeing that on Willow Creek Road now frequently. So I think it's a better default to say, what is the maximum safe speed, and set it at that.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I agree with that.
Okay, Ian, we're a little bit,
Okay.
7 minutes past 2, so
Okay.
we should probably move on.
How about, I think this is one of our last slides, but it kind of talks about a few things in the downtown that you guys have talked about. We could skip over to some of the things Councilman Blair said, the all-way pedestrian crossing at Gurley and Montezuma. I know we've heard this for a long time. It all comes down to those right bulb outs that are beautiful, and then our parking, which is great, limit what the efficiency of our intersections. And so while a PED scramble system I've seen one recently, and the one that I saw recently, it actually operated where it let you have a PED scramble, but when the vehicles went, you also crossed. And it's very hard to hold back crossing pedestrians. That's the one downside is, if you say that we'll implement this, we'll allow some phase time for everyone to go, and then we'll hold the walk symbols in the don't walk, and then we'll turn green arrows on, we'll turn the green balls on for cars, and that'll solve our problem. I don't believe that PEDs limit themselves to not walking when the walk symbol goes off. So I feel like with our short block or crossing distances, you're going to have people violating regardless because they see a green ball. So I've heard this for a long time. I don't believe it's our solution, but I don't have the solution, because the real solution would be remove the bulb outs, pull back some parking, and get an area for right-turning vehicles to turn right so that PEDs don't hold up the through movements. Because like Councilman Blair said, that's the problem. The through movement is being held up by like one right-turning vehicle who waits for pedestrians. Now, I've tried to allow, if you go to Montezuma and Gurley, when we turn the green ball, let's say we're going northbound, the green ball comes up first and the walk symbol stays in the don't walk. The intent is any car that's in the front that needs to turn right, they would turn right so that through movements could go. Then some seconds later, I release the PED movement with the intent to try to clear that. The problem is the PEDs go with the ball. And they bypass my trying to control them to make traffic better. So how do we fix that? PEDs
Just
PEDs
go to
don't
an
get in trouble for.
all-cross and give it a shot. It's horrible there.
Yeah.
I mean, I did it at lunchtime today. One
Northbound.
car making a right turn onto Gurley, and 14 cars behind him all the way back to Goodwin. And this is on a weekday. During the summertime, it's just a mess. So I'd say let's give it a try, and it's a much better solution than what we have now.
Maybe we have no right turn around the square and make them go down a block.
That's not a bad idea.
And I'm serious
That's a
about
good
that.
idea.
If you did that, and you're on Montezuma going north, then they can take a right on Willis and go around the block that way. Then you take all the pressure off the square.
I agree with you. We've talked about that internally.
Signage and education is not a bad way to do it.
The only negative to that's a very good solution because you can basically, if you're going northbound, you turn off on Goodwin. You'll learn real quick. You turn off on Goodwin or you go straight and you just circle back. The only pushback I would think you would get is sometimes businesses, depending on where you limit the movement, they might have some movement that's in place. We talked about this as actually a solution for the don't fit, don't park on Gurley Street as a way to remove the left. We have 5 lanes in there. We have this issue where we don't all fit, but we need 2 lanes of traffic. How about we get rid of the left onto Whiskey Row? I mean, you could turn on Cortez and circle around. You can do those innovative things. But do the businesses on Whiskey Row want to bypass the traffic from Gurley? What will they say? I'm just saying.
They'll come back if they want
Well,
to do it better.
one of the side benefits of that too is I think you'd increase the use of the parking garage.
That's right. Yeah.
You'd force people to go through that intersection to where the garage is.
Oh, I'd like to add that I think the last thing we want to do is take away any parking spaces. We want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I think if you skip the block all the way around the square, left and right turns, then they're going down to the next block by the parking garage and on Willis Street. And it's not precluding them from going to a business. You're just telling them you're going to get back to it by going around the block,
Exactly.
a double block.
That's kind of a big enough to be maybe something that we research a little bit more
Could we
with
do
maybe
that?
one of our on-calls or something who has expertise in that kind of thing and could look at it as just globally right in the downtown, see what we do with that. Because I think those changes could be really beneficial, but they might be a little bit major. But that would be a good way to go forward with that.
Probably better than the all cross.
We're still doing that
Well,
vehicular-wise. When you look at it, people will make those choices sometimes naturally when they take a ride off of Sheldon and
Right.
go on Willow Street to go left on Granite. They're still doing that in a big way, so we just changed it where everybody has to do that.
Yeah. Did you, I think this slide has basically, well, I had striping and some other things. We're going to widen in the, we do have in the IEP the widening in the Dells. That's an issue regarding future congestion, but that's, that's 10 years out. There were some other things brought up about overnight RV parking on streets and some things like that. Anything that we got, though, we can follow up on the back end. And then I did want to mention that we have heard the comment about the crosswalk on Copper Basin. I think that came from the upper part of Copper Basin near Timber Ridge.
Okay.
And I think we mentioned that at PB-TAC about the crosswalk there by Timber Ridge, and we're looking at where that should go, but we support that, and we'll get that put in.
The sooner you do it, the better. You start talking about what you did on Cortez and Sheldon to keep people from crossing there.
Yeah,
It's a public safety issue out there on Copper Basin.
yeah. And then finally, we have the West Gurley striping. We have a modification proposed for West Gurley to do some improvements between Park Avenue and Josephine. But certainly I have a big list of concerns from pretty much everyone, and we'll follow up as appropriate. Do you have other questions?
So any other comments from council before we go to the public? Yes, go ahead, Mike.
Mayor Pro Tem, do you think there's value to having a follow-up dialogue on this subject about what we've done, maybe a couple months out?
Absolutely.
Okay.
For me personally, but I will tell you, this has been very frustrating for me, and I am the liaison, and I see the work that goes on every month with bicycle pedestrian and the great work that we've done, but it's taken us 3.5 years to get a light in at Willow Lake and Prescott Lakes Parkway, actually 4, and the striping we're still waiting on. So it's those types of things that if we don't stay on top of them and get it done, I mean, we all have these ideas, and we know we can't build new roads, but we've got to do what we can and get it done. So we can talk and talk and talk and plan and plan and plan, but if we're not getting it done, then it doesn't really solve anything. So Ian, can we go to the public? Anybody else on? Go ahead, Alexa.
I guess my last comment would be, I think we've identified some problem areas today and some solutions. I think we also need to think long-term and come back with a long-term plan, because these are solutions to help us now, but what happens in a few years. So I'd like to see us have some sort of long-term plan.
Very good, Councilwoman. Thank you. So, Sarah, we have people that would like to speak to the...
We do. We have 2 requests on this item. The first one is from Mike Amons.
Okay.
And Councilman or Mayor Pro Tem, we will put together a comprehensive list of projects that are being worked on in planning, what have you, and then bring that back to council.
With a timeline.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi.
It's interesting to be on this side. I've always been up there. What do I do first? I identify myself, Mike Ammons. I live in the ranch. I have a suggestion that's already been talked and maybe has been shot down, but I suggest the intersections of Gurley and Montezuma, Goodwin and Montezuma, red traffic lights, and a pedestrian free-for-all crossing. Now, if you have a free-for-all, that means the X. My comment would be on the X is to make, I ride a motorcycle. My wife and I, she's on the back with me. The white lines during when they're moist are like riding on ice. My suggestion, if you're going to put an X in the middle of the road, that it has some kind of a non-skid product incorporated into the paint, similar to a flight deck of an aircraft carrier, but not necessarily that rough, but something to where the adhesion of the tires are the same as the asphalt on the ground, okay? We need to do something on that intersection, whether we could have a test period. Why wait till somebody's injured, maimed, or killed before we make a correction, all right? There's other cities that have this system. Now, are we all working on the same regulations? I don't know, but a phone call, how did you guys do this? I suggest we give it a go, because traffic doesn't flow on those places. And at some signal lights, it's not point one. Number two, some signal lights, when I'm on my bike, motorcycle, we're sitting there waiting for 3 and 4 cycles. Whatever's going on in the ground or on the pole or whatever that tells me I'm sitting there, they can't see me. I wish there was a way to make it better, but that is an issue. 69 and Prescott Lakes Parkway is one of those. I'll sit there 3 cycles and I'll turn around. Is there a car behind me? One time there was a car, but he parked so far behind me, I'm back here. Come on, come on, come on. And he, didn't understand what I was doing, but I've taken Steve's suggestion once or twice.
Did you run that?
And I will not admit to that. There's another section in the ranch that's the Ranch Road in East Lycée. It's the exit of AM/PM and the Fitness for 10. I personally have been on my bike. which has, it's a newer bike, Harley Davidson, and it has I've upgraded the headlights and the turn signals, it has 5 very bright lights. I've been coming down Lycée, and the speed limit's 25, and I go slower because there are people walking their dogs, etc. Come around the corner, and this lady in an SUV pulls out in front of me, and she's pointing at me, and I have no clue why, but I'm stopping. They had the stop sign. There is something wrong with that intersection regarding the stop sign. I don't know where the people's visuals are, but they're not looking this way. And I've come on the other direction going up Lycée and had the same condition happen. My suggestion is there is a stop sign. Sometimes it gets covered up with a tree, whether it's too high up, too far over, I don't know. But my suggestion would be put the word stop and a limit light on that intersection. And that's all I have.
Mike, thank you for coming and bringing those forward. And certainly Ian's that you could speak with Ian afterward if you have others. So thank you. Thank you for coming.
Fred Oswald.
Fred is on our pedestrian bicycle committee, has helped us a lot. Hello, Fred.
Hi, I'm a certified bicycle safety instructor, although I have not taught any classes since moving to Prescott the last 6 years. But I've had several safety concerns. I brought them to the bike pedestrian committee, and most of them they have not acted on. But I'd like to mention 2 of them now. The most serious is we have some roads with very steep downhill grades, and those are not suitable for bike lanes. It's Prescott Lakes Parkway and Rosser Street coming to 89, and Willow Creek Road coming down the hill. Those are very unsafe to ride within 4 or 5 feet of the curb, and I won't ride there. I'll ride out in the road, in the lane, in the middle of the lane, and I'll be going about the speed limit there because of the downhill. They should have taken those bike lanes off and moved the pavement lines over and share the lane symbols in the right-hand lane. The other safety concern is we talked a little earlier about traffic loops that control traffic lights. I've not seen any in this city that are marked, and many of them are covered over with a layer of asphalt, so that even someone like me who knows how to work a traffic loop can't work it because I can't see where to go. In many of these, you have to be within about that far of the wire to trip the light, and if you can't see a target, you can't do that. I brought that to the bike pedestrian committee, and nothing's happened, so I'm rather frustrated. It's a safety issue. You're discouraging people from having respect for the law when you won't make the traffic light work for them. So what they need to do is test all of these intersections. Scrap wheel would be a good test article, and then adjust them if necessary so that they work, and then mark them, mark the hot spot so that people know where to stop. And that'll also help people that don't know how to work traffic control signals. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ian, I think that's been another issue that we've been waiting to get done. Thank you. Any other comments from council? If not, we'll go on to our next item. A presentation of proposed water policy changes. Ian, I want to thank you very much for your presentation.
Whatever you want. Is it this one?
That's actually the wrong one. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Today's presentation, I'm going to kind of kick it off, and we're going to do sort of as a group with Craig and Bran kind of covering their areas of subject matter expertise. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I wanted to point this out. This is our schedule, at least our proposed schedule for
the conversation we're having about water policy. I would suggest that this is the sort of minimum schedule that we would suggest, that if there's a need for more discussion and more about this topic, we can certainly add meetings as needed. But this, as you can see, goes through 2 times a month through August, and then with a target date of September 10. But certainly, if there's need for more discussion, then we can certainly add meetings. I'd also like to kind of point out, while we're on this schedule, that there are some folks contending that this policy is being somehow made in secret, or it's being made in closed doors. And the policy is being made here by this council with input from the public. So all of these meetings are intended to develop this new policy, and you can see there are 6 work or study sessions, and then a voting session, and all of them, I presume, are going to be open for public comment on the particular matter. So I think that should be made real clear that what's being presented during these study sessions are what staff is sort of proposing as a policy, but this isn't the final policy is made by you after input from the public. Next slide, please. So just want to review what we talked about 2 weeks ago. We talked about how we want to simplify our processes. We're basing decisions and recommendations on policy and code changes on data, real-time data that we know, rather than speculation and guessing. And obviously, as we've heard at prior meetings, the data is good. It's good news about our water users and our conservation programs. I think what we're ultimately looking to do is improve on how we reclaim water, how we reclaim water, particularly in where we don't have sewer. As we've heard in some of our prior presentations, that's probably the single biggest waster of water, is not having it returned to our water treatment plant and then recharge into the ground. And the second one is obviously outdoor water use. That's another use of water that isn't returned to our recharge wells. And then, as we discussed, I think 2 weeks ago, there was a discussion about updating the rebate program to make it more user-friendly and actually make it more worthwhile, and provide rebates where they really sort of count. Next slide, please. So today, we're going to be talking about proposed policy changes with the council. This is intended to be a long-term plan. In the past, the council has been essentially had a program of updating the policy almost on a yearly basis. And as we sort of all kind of intuitively know, policies and plans really need to be long-term to be effective. You set your goals, you sort of your North Star of what you want to achieve, and then you develop the plan and the policy to attain those goals over a long period of time. And not to say that our policies in the past have been ineffective. In fact, as the data has shown, they've been very effective on our ability and the residents' ability and our water users' ability to conserve. And that's the main focus of the policy, is primarily is conservation of the resource. So this policy would apply to all new applications for water service of any type. Next slide, please. So again, the policy is about conservation, and the policy is about, yes. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And as John mentioned, this is a draft. This is for all of you as a council to review.
Mike.
The mic's on. If it is, you might need.
Okay. All right, again, this is a draft. So this is for all of you as a council, as well as the public, to review, discuss, and comment and suggest changes to us for this. Here on the water conservation policy side, The city is looking to continue to be that leader in conservation and manage our water resources and utilize the groundwater resources, effectively and efficiently. And that we'll, prove some of that through our conservation measures and the conservation incentive program that's on the voting session this afternoon in order to initiate and alter conservation efforts through the incentive program on current devices and programs that are being utilized in order to help us all out the best on the conservation side. So some of the new tools that we have in order to be able to utilize, in the past we had hard numbers. We said that, a number of years ago, back in 1998, we said that every residential house was going to be allocated 0.35 acre-feet of water. Now through new tools like the Water Resources Management Model, or the WORM, that tool brings in real data from every single customer, every water service in the city, so it is data on actual water usage. And we're able to monitor that, calculate that in order to look at the true water trends and uses. Also with the water conservation trends, the Woodard model that we will be receiving there, his model is again identifying how we as the public and our customers have changed our water uses over the years and how they continue to drop with the addition of water conservation devices, toilets, sink aerators, shower heads. Everything that we purchase nowadays is much more efficient than what we had years ago. So that's where the Woodard model is coming into play, tracking and identifying and presenting those trends. So some of the concepts in this draft policy here. So any requests, water service needs for less than 5 acre-feet would be approved administratively. Then if there's water demand analysis may be required for any project that's proposing to use greater than 5 acre-feet of water per year in there. So then it can be, looked at, considered that use and potential alterations to that use. Water would be provided without specific amounts being allocated to it, like the old 0.35. That would go away and would not be considered, being that we would have the WORM to track specific direct use and not just have a number attached to a use. Cost-benefit analysis may be required with applicants. In the event of a property applying for water service that already has an existing entitlement, there's already a water contract out there, it would be considered that those existing contracts would have to be used up or considered utilized on the project before additional water would be considered from the city beyond that entitlement. And then all water usage and or connections would be subject to compliance with the city codes, policies, and those including the connectivity to the city's sanitary sewer system.
Thanks, Craig. So this piece will address basically the logistics of water transactions that happen across our customer base. When they present to community development, projects requiring less than 5 acre-feet a year will contact the department, basically, usually present at our counter, to verify that the project can proceed to a building permit. Projects such as this would include an example such as a multifamily 6-unit apartment complex that has the appropriate zoning in place, but would require less than 5 acre-feet per year. Rather than bringing that to council solely for a water allocation or a water service agreement approval, those projects would be just require in-house review by staff across departments, and we would make an administrative approval for them to proceed through their building permit and their water.
Question.
Yes.
If you're not going to apply an individual unit expectation of use, how can you come up with a 5 acre foot limit? Does the applicant just say, I'm not going to use more than 5 acre feet, and I've got a 40 unit development?
Through the worm, we can go in.
It's after the fact, though.
Yes, it will be for that. We can go into the worm and look at like scenarios. Same type of development, same type of commercial business, and we can look at the usage trends from existing businesses within our system.
So you probably will have a single unit expectation. Single residential family unit.
I think the distinction here is our current water service agreements allocate a specific number of acre feet. And when Craig was mentioning it earlier, that's what's going to go away. We're not going to allocate a specific number of acre feet for a project. We're still going to look at what the likely use of the project is based on the worm, and if that use is likely to be 5 acres or less, then it would go through the administrative process. But it wouldn't matter if it were 2.5 acre feet or 4 acre feet. We're not going to allocate that on paper to say, here you get 2.5 acre feet, because frankly nobody follows it. Most use less than what we allocate, but the purpose of that agreement was really sort of internal calculations. So we're going to still track the usage. We're just not going to allocate externally to the user.
Well, we had a built-in incentive for developments that were going to use low-use, high-efficiency fixtures, et cetera, so that they would be able to receive a more liberal allocation. But with this, we lose that incentive because you're only going to measure it after the fact. A part of that 0.35 was a estimated 0.10 for commercial services that would be provided for a residential unit. So we're taking that away because we now have the ability to measure different categories of commercial use, correct?
Correct. We can track all uses that we have, all connected uses that we have. We're able to track that through the worm.
Well, my concern is that if we're going to measure this usage after we've already approved the building, then we don't really know how to manage the approval of residential units as they're coming forward to us. And we lose the incentive for the builder to say, okay, I'm going to build this with very efficient fixtures, et cetera, so that I have the ability to get a better approval. Does that make sense?
If you recall, though, the line that always stuck with me is you can't save the same water twice. So if it's fixtures in the house, then the water gets returned through our sewer system and water treatment system and recharged into the ground. It's the external use and it's the unsewered parts of the city where we see the most loss. And so I think the concept here is that we know, generally speaking, that a single-family home uses maybe 0.15, give or take, acre feet. So if somebody comes in and says, I want to put in 10 homes or 20 apartments, let's say, we know what that use is. That's going to fall under the 5 acre feet. So the water service is administratively approved. Everything else still has to go through all the other processes. But I think the other item is in number 3 on that, is that they have to abide by all the city codes and policies. So they're going to have to abide by the outdoor water use in terms of landscaping. They're going to have to abide by our plumbing code. And as you also recall, that you know, unless you go on the black markets, you can't find high water use, or by used, I guess, but you can't find sort of high water use fixtures anymore because the market drives that. So I think trying to avoid sort of confusing, not allocating a specific number of acre feet to a project versus not tracking it. We will still track it internally, but we're just not going to allocate X number of acre feet because it was kind of a meaningless allocation.
Well, I think you're overly focusing on recharge and collecting effluent so we can manage our water portfolio. Whereas the way we're managing it now, we actually have a good regulatory mechanism to identify and manage our growth percentages through water allocation. And by taking that off and just looking at how we collect effluent and treat it, then we lose that ability to have a legitimate regulatory mechanism on the growth that is pressuring the city now with congestion and traffic and those other things we've already discussed.
Excuse me, Councilman Lamberson.
Thank you, Billy. 5 acre feet, describe that to me again. What you just said about 5 acre feet?
About the 5 acre feet, what we
Using a
have in
model.
there is,
Well-
as in the existing policy, is projects under 5 acre feet of usage would be able to be administratively approved.
Okay, now that you've said that, under 5 acre feet, so that could be 4.99. How many gallons in 5 acre feet of water, Craig? Okay?
325,851 gallons per acre foot, times
Okay,
5.
thank you very much. And what does the average consumer use? You've got that statistic, you've got that information in your database, you just said you did. What does the average consumer residential use?
0.17.
Okay? Understanding that, why would we talk about 5 acre feet? To me, it's like what's his name here was saying, it seems like a superfluous number to discuss 5 acre feet when indeed we understand that it's not real. At the end of the day, you know, if people are only using 1.7 acre feet, why aren't we talking about that number?
The 5 acre feet then comes into play, so if there's a multifamily project, so it's, 10 apartment units, something like that, then that would be below that 5 acre feet. It's the matter of, once it gets above the 5 acre feet, then it would come towards the water committee for review and consideration. As we were working on this draft, again, it's a draft for these discussions, as we were working on this, staff was looking at that we had to have something as a dividing line between administrative policy items that could be addressed versus then going to the water committee.
Yeah,
Streamlining.
Councilman Lamerson, you certainly could draw the line at a higher number or a lower number for administrative approval. There's no magic about 5 acre feet or less.
Thank you. That's my question. So I just want the public to understand, we're not out there telling everybody you're going to get 5 acre feet of water.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, that's not what's going on.
It's projects that the usage should be under 5. Staff is recommending it be done administratively versus coming to council, but you certainly could draw the line at 2.5 acre feet or 6 acre feet, or, I mean, there's no magic about where you draw the line.
So,
Right.
Councilman, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Here again, if the average residential consumer in the city of Prescott is using less than 0.2 acre feet.
That's correct.
Yeah, less than 2.2 acre feet of water. I don't understand why, if we're going to talk about policy, we're not addressing that kind of a number rather than 5 acre feet of water. I just think that the flexibility becomes distorted when you put out there for grabs 5 acre feet of water.
This becomes a point of policy debate for you all to determine where that number is appropriate. Because, for instance, do you want the council to address or to have to approve? Is that something that, for water service purposes only, is that an appropriate scope of project to go to the council? So 5 acre feet is roughly 25 homes 30 homes. So depending on, what we currently know. So is that for water, again, for water service purposes only, that's how we kind of derive the number that a 30-home subdivision for water service purposes wouldn't need a special council action to allocate the water to that project. So it's probably maybe, 40 apartments. If you feel as a council that number should be a lower number, that you want to pass on or talk about smaller scope projects or other commercial projects, then that 5 could, as the city manager, the 5 could go down. So and that's kind of, so we sort of derived it as, 10 or 20, 30 homes would be administratively approved. Again, just for, we're talking about in the context of water service, it would still have to go through all the other approvals. So that's kind of a point of debate that this council should have on that. And can I just also throw in one other thing? Councilman Good mentioned that something, about using the water policy as a growth management tool. And that should be also an item of debate for this council, because the question is, do you want the water management policy to be a water management policy, or do you want to use your water as a growth management tool? So that's a question too.
Councilman Shiska, and then I have a comment.
Thank you. If we allocate a certain amount of water to a project, and we're going by what's actually going through the meter, say we allocate 3 acre-feet to a project, and instead of 0.15, they're using 0.1. So does that mean that that person could go, oh, you allocated me 3 acre-feet, I'm not using anywhere close to 3 acre-feet, so I can add more units to. So, I like this policy because basically it's not naming a certain acre-foot that you have allocated to you. I think that it's looking at empirical information and not establishing a bellwether point, which would be the 3 acre-feet or whatever it is.
Councilman Shishko, one of the flaws, I think, in the existing policy is that because we didn't have real data, you created a false allocation that was significantly higher than actual usage, and you actually tied up to the private individual a ton of water that they don't really need.
Right.
And you can't get back. Whether it's a 0.35 or 0.25, if the reality is 0.17, 0.35, you've doubled the allocation necessary in this day and time.
Or less than 0.17.
Yeah.
So I think we're limiting ourselves when we have a certain amount that we're allocating, and I think that it promotes growth rather than allocating a certain amount promotes growth rather than deflecting growth.
And is our goal here also to reduce some of the bureaucracy and streamline? I mean, that's what I always thought, that's what we're talking about here. So I just wanted to make that point. So can we, any other comments? Can we move on? Thank you.
So subject to the acre feet that council arrives at and finds acceptable, the administrative process would, let's hypothetically use the 5 acre feet, would look like basically a customer presenting to the community development counter, staff performing an analysis versus the land development code for what we know to be the typical usage for a project like that. And as I had mentioned earlier, an example of that might be a 6-unit apartment building being developed on a multifamily parcel and under appropriate zoning, not requiring a rezone. So they would be able to bring that project in, come through the PAC process, receive feedback from all departments, and subject to meeting the requirements of the LDC, would be able to move forward to a building permit without having to come to council to approve a water service agreement, because it would be assumed that that type of development and that number of units, we know based on the data that we have in hand, won't hit that threshold. So that would be subject to an administrative staff review across all departments that would normally contribute to that process, and would be able to move to an administrative approval through the building permit process. Of course, they would be required to submit all applications and any permits that are related to their development scheme. But if the project is otherwise approved administratively or by council action, if that's applicable, water is allocated to the project. And of course, they would be abiding by all city codes and policies relative to development. Next slide. Within the city limits, council approval for projects over 5 acre-feet would be similar to what council already sees. We're talking about preliminary and final plats, site plans for large or complex commercial projects or industrial projects, annexations, of course, where we need to have a more in-depth analysis of what the projected usage will be. So council approval would be required for those types of projects as currently happens. Again, the applicant would be contacting community development for their initial instructions and how to move through the process. We would be guiding them on that. Attending a pre-application conference would be a part of that, where they are receiving input from all departments that participate in development proposals and review. They would be required to submit all the applications that are normally required and complete a platting process if that's applicable. The city council then would have the opportunity to vote on the proposed project and that water use, just like they do under the current policy. And of course, those projects would also abide by city codes and policies.
Then we would go to proposed projects outside of city limits. So they would contact Public Works. If the project already has an existing entitlement, water contract that's already out there, then they would turn around and continue under the city's within city limits process, because they already have the right to water by that existing contract. If the project does not have that existing entitlement to water, water service may be available if the project is within the city's expansion zone. And we'll have a slide that will show the expansion zone and what that includes in a moment. Then it would be subject to the PAC application, go through that process to include a feasibility analysis and cost-benefit analysis. Then the PAC application would be reviewed by city staff. So I realize this is a poor exhibit. What's included in here, so this is the draft of the expansion zone map. So that includes the current city limits, portions of Chino Valley up on the far north of that exhibit. You have by Prescott Indian Tribe, contracted county areas, and then the city's 2015 land use general plan area is what is included into that yellow boundary area. So then that water application process for continuing for the outside city limits. So after staff review is complete, the application will be forwarded to the city's water issues subcommittee for recommendation, review and discussion and recommendation potentially. Following that recommendation, then the application will be forwarded to city council as a whole for approval determination on that. If it's been approved, the project will be subject to the city's within city limits process at that point.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you. Craig, as we live, breathe, and speak today, the policy is that we don't deliver the citizens of Prescott's water outside of the city limits. What is the rationale for now taking water out of a portfolio that the citizens of Prescott have in delivering the water outside of the city limits of Prescott?
The one caveat would be that we do deliver some outside currently where they have existing contracts.
Okay, but now we're trying to change that to where we would be delivering water outside the city limits. That's where my question lies. What's the rationale for that? I understand previous contracts. I'm not done. All right?
Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, sir.
I can address that. I think it's the main reason is that the two requirements would be that if you're going to get on city water, outside the city, you have to be on city sewer. So we get all that recharge back. And then the second requirement would be that you have to follow the city's outdoor water use and plant, plant palette. So again, to reduce the amount of outdoor water. If you think about a project, housing or whatever that's going on outside the city limits, they're going to put wells and septic tanks in. They're drinking from the same aquifer, and they're not returning any of it to the to recharge. So it really is kind of a regional approach to for AMA purposes to use that city water to then return it for recharge. And that's the rationale behind it.
Thank you for your clarification on it, John.
And the cost of connection would be done by the person that's applying.
The cost of
The infrastructure.
right? The infrastructure to and from, or from and to, water to, and then the sewer back would be borne by the developer owner, and they would also have to pay the city's impact fees for the two water impact fees as well as the sewer fee, and then would be subject to the city's out of city
Charge.
regular rate, which is currently a 30% surcharge.
Okay. Thank you.
So to go to John's example there, if you go out like the Williamson Valley area, we have Hokagon. It's in the county. It has city water service on it. There's no city sewer there. There are adjoining properties that are being developed today with wells and septics. So again, to John's comment there, that is water that's being drawn within the AMA and going into a septic, so there is not the benefit, the opportunity for it to be recharged and such.
So this is our, just summarizing what we talked about today, and then if you could just go to the last slide. Again, I want to reemphasize the current, I guess, minimum schedule of meetings, of discussions, of this conversation on water is laid out here for you and the public to have that conversation. So at this point, we'll turn it back over to you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Any other comments from council? Councilman Good?
Yeah, I just, my initial feeling is that as we remove some of the regulatory review of projects coming forward by allowing a 30-unit single-family subdivision or a 35-unit multi-family apartment without any real notice to council, we might be creating too liberal of a growth opportunity, and I think that we probably should reduce that number somewhat so that we can monitor how it actually works, because it's always much more difficult to restrain a policy than to allow it to expand. So we won't be allocating X number of acre feet per year under this policy, correct?
Correct.
So if you just say, well, what if scenarios, if 30-unit or 35-unit apartment buildings are approved administratively, we could have thousands of units approved administratively that we wouldn't really know about until our constituents say, what the heck is this big old giant development happening in my backyard? And we said, gee, I don't really know. It was handled administratively. So I think we probably ought to, this is a significant change in how we allocate water, no question. And I think we probably ought to be a little more careful as we move forward. And if it turns out that we don't really have any real problems with it, we can always make it larger as far as the acre-foot restriction down the road. So those are my thoughts.
I'd agree with that. We have been used to the water committee seeing things that were more than 3 units, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Leslie? 3 units. And so now what we're talking about literally is having 40, 50, 60 units approved administratively without the water committee seeing a balance of where we're at or anything. And I am a little bit concerned about that. So I would like to side on the same way that Bill's talking about, maybe looking at 2 acre feet being approved administratively than 5, and then seeing how that goes with a full report every year.
Okay, and we can definitely take that back, and there is another piece, very large piece, to that puzzle of consideration.
Obviously, all projects that come through are going to be vetted against the land development policy for appropriateness of zoning, appropriateness of, commercial development being in a commercial or industrial zoning district. So what we're really just getting away from is the over allocation and then the paper accounting that has been historically happening with our existing policy. And of course, it's at the pleasure of council as to what that level of acre feet will end up to be within the policy. But the same reviews will happen in terms of preliminary and final plats and other, complex site plans, commercial and industrial site plans. And then the administrative approvals would be the same as well for revisions of plat and non-complicated site plans. So we wouldn't be changing anything with the amount of staff review. We would just be not attaching the water allocation piece to it and having a separate accounting of water that doesn't necessarily reflect what's going through the meter.
So Brand, if I could speak to that, so then using Councilman Good's scenario, we would know about a big, large complex that's going up. Just because it didn't go through the water, we would still know for other reasons.
I still think that the accountability that we have as a group, being on the water committee for 14 years, I still think that we have accountability to the public to know how much water we're giving out. And I think that accountability still needs to be made. I mean, the keeping track of it shouldn't be a difficult situation. At any given time, I would like to know from you guys how much water have we spent in the last 6 months. And if you're not going to keep track of it, that's going to be a tough thing to do. And I still think we have an obligation, a mental obligation, to know how much we're doing.
I think it's going to be, we're still going to keep track of it, just in a different manner. We're not going to be putting that hard allocation to it on paper. But we already know all of our existing use, and then for each additional connection with the worm, then we can use information from that for those projections.
So you'll be able to still track it to let
Yes.
us know when we ask the question.
Yes.
I still think that overall arching number of 5 acre feet should be lowered to 2.
And that's why this is a draft discussion. Councilman Lamerson.
I kind of chime in with both Phil and Steve. If it ain't broke, don't fix. We had somebody come here that was a supposed expert from the planet water, all right? He came here not too long ago at the grace of Michael and told us how wonderful the policy we're under has worked for this city and how well it's done us, all right? Not only have we cut our water usage, not only have we conserved a lot of water, and all of a sudden we want to change things. And I just don't understand, if it ain't broke, why are we trying to fix it?
Well, the issue, Councilman, is that we would allocate water and then never pay attention to it.
I can understand keeping track of it, but there's a difference between keeping track of it and trying to change the whole thing.
Sure, and I'm not trying to defend the policy, but I'm sitting there saying, okay, so if a development over 2 acre feet has to go through the same process, which is a cost-benefit analysis, as, a project that is, 100 acre feet, I think that at some point it's an economic thing for smaller projects. I'm not objecting to anything that you're saying as far as, if you decide 2 acre feet, or if we decide 2 acre feet, then that's what it is. I just don't want to put a burden on somebody with a small project to do a cost-benefit analysis. I'm not sure if it's warranted.
I agree with that. I agree with that
appreciate
100%.
those-
Yeah.
I appreciate those comments. On the other hand, the policy that we have in place today didn't come by accident. All right? It was worked through people that are really astute on water. They happen to have worked for ADWR and every other thing that we just happened to steal away from ADWR that came here and helped us draft where we've been. Now, all of a sudden, we want to take and go and reinvent the wheel. And I'm not so sure we need to reinvent the wheel. That's my point. You want to change the tire, let's look at that.
And Mayor Pro Tem, I wanted to clarify, I wasn't suggesting that 1,000-unit development wouldn't be known and reviewed. But if we've got 20, 30-unit developments, that's 600 units that would fall into this administrative overview, and we might not necessarily be aware of it or see it, even though if it met all the zoning codes and building codes and everything else, it would just pass through that way. So that's why I think a lower number, you can look at the the 18-unit development behind the Miller Valley Fries. That's a pretty significant development, but that would fall within this category. We've got another one over on Hillside, I think it's like 14 units. Those are nice fill-in developments. They would certainly pass this requirement. But once you get into the 20 plus, you're talking about a pretty good sized piece of property and a pretty significant development within a neighborhood. And I think it would be appropriate that the council have a look at it and make sure the public has a chance to weigh in and before it goes forward.
And my point was we still would have a chance to weigh in before it goes forward. It just wouldn't be tied to the water allotment. Is that right?
Right. Those projects that were allowed by right in the zoning might fall under that that very criteria that you mentioned, Councilman Good. But most complex commercial developments or subdivisions, even if they're only 6 to 10 lots, have to come before council for plat review and approval. So that doesn't change.
I think both of those were on maybe a 2-lot section of the street. So they wouldn't come forward to us.
They're just subject to a standard building permit
Right.
because the use is allowed. That's correct. They would go
Right.
through the building permit review just like any other building
Right.
permit.
I know until 1998, we didn't track the water anyway. It's just until we went out of safe yield, so to speak, when the policy changed. And I think, I think if we're going to will that back, I think we need to will it back slowly.
Sure.
And I think by looking at what we're doing, and then if it pans out, and I'm like you, Phil, I don't have a problem with raising it if it's working well.
Good. Michael?
You are going from administrative approval of 3 units to tenfold under this, tenfold plus. To have some concern that may be just moving too swiftly, I think is a valid concern. And it's really, if you guys are willing on the Water Issues Committee, which you are, to look at more projects, then find a happy medium, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, I think we have to also be really clear as why we're doing this. I think that speaks to your issue, Councilman Emerson. Is this to, take away some of the bureaucracy, to make it so people don't have to jump through so many hoops to build a small project?
Well, I think the Water Issues Committee vets the project to the fact that, do we have too many apartments? Do we want to, invest the water in more? Where is it that, what are we here for? And that's just to be another filter. And I don't have a problem with meeting as a water committee to look at those things. But I don't think we need just to raise it endlessly to just have construction take place. I don't think that's necessary.
Okay. So anything else, Craig, Bren? Thank you very much. And so I believe because it is a little bit after 3 o'clock, we will take that third issue and bring it to another study session.
Mayor Pro Tem, sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
You did have one public comment
Thank
card
you.
on this matter.
Thank you, Sarah.
Howard Mechanic.
Mayor Pro Tem and Council, I think this is generally a good set of proposals here. I did have a concern when it was first brought up by Mr. Halstead 2 weeks ago. There was a response that the public has conserved considerably, and we need to congratulate the public, and I agree with you 100%. And the council has passed policies that were very good, and we need to congratulate council. I agree with that. Now, the one thing that I didn't agree with was the reaction by some council members that we are doing a great job to protect our groundwater that is depleting every year. Now, the overdraft is approximately every 2 gallons we pump in the AMA. 1 gallon is overdraft. It's a serious issue. And you may come back and say, well, it's going to take 100 years before we're out of water. Do you want to tell your grandkid that just got born that we're going to deplete all your groundwater, and when you die, it'll be gone? But it's going to be 100 years, so we don't need a concern with that. Safe yield was not mentioned. Those 2 words are not mentioned in all of these proposals. Now, the council did react, saying that we're on the right path in Prescott, it's everybody else's fault here. Now, I have two issues regarding that. One, if your plan is to take the 10,000 acre feet that you're not using, you have a legal right to pump an additional 10,000 acre feet. How will that affect our groundwater when you pump that 10,000 acre feet? That will increase the overdraft by 10,000 acre feet per year. An overdraft that's approximately 18,000 now will go up to 28,000. That is your plan. You're telling everybody in the AMA you're planning on using every drop that you have legally access to. And then you're asking the other people in the AMA to do something different. They're not supposed to use all the water that they're legally entitled to. What we need to do, as Mr. Good mentioned, is get together with all of the other jurisdictions in the AMA. It's a coincidence. Yesterday I was cleaning out a pile of documents I had from when I was on the Conservation Committee and the Safe Yield Committees. Yes, there were 2 Safe Yield Committees. I came across this final report on Safe Yield put out by the Prescott Active Management Area Groundwater User Advisory Committee and the Upper Verde Watershed Protection Coalition Safe Yield Work Group. How many of you have read these 2 reports? Yeah. People who have been here for over 10 years may have read it. So please read the report. This is our last chance to get everybody together in the AMA. And I just want to say that Mr. McConnell, when he was asked, why don't you get the other jurisdictions together in the AMA, he said, if we're invited, we'll show up. It's up to Prescott as the leader in the AMA, as the largest user in the AMA, as the only designated provider in the AMA. Who should invite everybody together? The city of Prescott. This is our last chance before you blow the Safe Yield away totally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did receive another from Leslie Hoy.
Okay, Leslie?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I know we're behind on time, so I'll try to be succinct. I appreciate being invited into the public process, but in the interest of that, there's a couple of process things that would help. First of all, I'd like to have a copy of today's slides sent to info@cwagaz.org so that we have a chance to review them. If we're going to be able to come to these meetings and participate fully, we need to have details in the packet for each meeting. For instance, there was very little in the council memos today, so there was really no chance to prepare for adequate discussion. Also, I'd like that when it's a complex issue to be allowed more than 3 minutes per speaker. Most people can finish in 3 minutes, but sometimes it might be necessary to have a little bit more time. Then as to the 0.17 acre feet, at the time that this was figured out by the city and we lowered it to 0.2 for water efficient homes, Mr. McConnell, our former city manager, felt that we needed what he called a headroom. As we go forward and the climate may change and it may become drier and drier, we're not allowing ourselves any space when it comes to water use. Also, I did find in my notes there was a study of commercial water use, and it was determined that it came out to 0.08 acre feet for the services needed for each individual household. So 0.17 plus 0.08 equals 0.25. And we haven't really been told what is going to be done about the commercial water usage. We can't ignore what water is required for the support services. And then my one last thing is, if we're going to supply water outside the city limits for recharge, is that water going to be used just for more growth, or is that water going to be returned to the aquifer for safe yield? I don't expect an answer today, but hopefully later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. So we will adjourn. Is that the last one, Sarah?
Yes, it is.
So any other comments from council? If not, then we will adjourn for 5 minutes. So it is 3:13, so we'll be back here at 3:18. Thank you.